Our guest today is Michael Cohen, an American broadcaster born and raised in the Philippines. The Asia-Pacific region's very active international media companies have tapped Mike's news gathering for over 3 decades. His reporting about the CCP and its activities there is extensive. He has worked with international news broadcasters, Fox News, CNN, BBC, SkyNews, and also regional networks in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the USA, all while writing for major UK publications like The Mirror and The Sun. He is the go-to man for stories on the CCP's creeping expansion into Philippine maritime territory and one of the first journalists to expose their violations of the law of sea and environmental destruction of ocean resources. Mike also exposed the Chinese Communists' illegal arms sales to terrorist organizations and Maoist rebels in the Philippines and their illicit smuggling to spread their influence across the Asia-Pacific. Today, Mike Cohen sat down and spoke with the Global Quit the CCP Center about the lies and violations of international agreements made by the party that controls China's government and their military, what they've done in the Asia-Pacific and are reportedly now doing in New York City. He shared his expert opinion on why the CCP cannot be trusted and Americans need to quit a totalitarian regime that is destroying the world with its treachery.
Good evening, Mike. I'm the reporter of Global Quit CCP Center. Would you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us about your background in journalism?
Ni hao. My name is Michael Cohen. I'm a journalist who has been in the business about 30 years. My mother is from the Philippines. I was born in the Philippines. My father is also from Asia. He was a Russian refugee who grew up in Shanghai. He was born there in 1931 in China, but in a different China, not the China of today. A China that was open, that was caring, and that allowed anyone to come in and do what they wanted, because there was a different government then in the area where he was raised. His family had to leave because of the war with Japan, and they moved to the Philippines. Mostly I'm best known in the Philippines for working for ABS-CBN, which was their largest broadcast network. It is still in existence. It's still there in the Philippines, although it was targeted by the CCP and was made to shut down because it was talking about the abuses of what China was doing, using different officials in the Philippines in order to control and take over the narcotics trade. And that is the sad reality that we who live in Asia know all too well, that the CCP presents a very smiling face to many people. Some people even joke and say, oh, it's Winnie the Pooh, but it's not. It is not a kind animal. It is a very dangerous beast, and it is a beast that can destroy the world if we are not careful and we allow it.
Also, you are American. I've heard that your family were victims of communism. Could you share some of your stories?
As I said, my father was from a refugee family from Russia that escaped communism by going to China. And in this case, they were able to survive that whole time. Now, his mother and father, when the Japanese invaded in about 1935 or 1936, they moved to the Philippines. But my dad's aunties, my grandmother's sisters, stayed behind in Tianjin in China. And they went through some very hard times. After the war, the communists under Mao Zedong came after them and treated them very badly because they thought that they were spies for the Russians or spies for the Americans or spies for anyone. It is almost like they are paranoid that even these people who fought alongside them during the war against the Japanese were now their enemies. So people from Japan, people from China, people from other parts of Asia who could not practice their religion would come to Davao, would come to Philippines so that they could live free. And that is what the Philippines is known for. And that is why the CCP does not like the Philippines.
Yeah, so how did the CCP treat your parents during they were in China? Very badly?
Well, my father had already left by the time the CCP took over, but his relatives were not treated well. They were treated very badly. On my grandfather's side, those relatives who came after the war with Japan, after World War II, they just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to them. They were in Harbin, and suddenly they were no more. And that is what happened. They just disappeared. So that happened on my mother's side, my grandfather's side. But exactly what happened, we don't know. They just vanished. And this was during the time of the CCP.
Yeah. So could you provide a few examples of CCP violence and lies that you have personally witnessed?
When I was a journalist starting in the Philippines, this was in 1993, I remember interviewing officials from the Chinese consulate and the Chinese embassy in the Philippines. They were being interviewed because their fishermen were getting caught inside Philippine waters. They were fishing using very, very bad chemicals called sodium cyanide. The sodium cyanide is what they spray to make the fish just float. The fish is still alive. And they bring this fish back to China and they serve it to people with cyanide in the fish. Now, the cyanide also destroys the reefs. At the time, my mother's cousin was a local official on one island. So they kept catching all these Chinese fishermen, not from Taiwan, not from Hong Kong, from mainland China, who were coming to different parts of the Philippines. And they were destroying the reefs, causing so much destruction. It got so bad that they captured almost 1,000 fishing boats from different places in China, mostly from Hainan, who were coming into Philippines and causing big problems with the reefs. But they were not content to just do it in the Philippines. They were also doing it at the CCP's direction in Indonesia, Malaysia, and even as far away as Cambodia and Thailand. So these are the things that would happen. When we would talk to the officials from the Chinese government, they would say, oh, those are not our citizens. They did not do that without permission. They are illegal. They will be punished when they go back to China. And yet, when we would go see them, they did not know we could see, and we had people who could speak Mandarin with us. And so they would say, when the fishermen would see the Chinese embassy official, they would salute. They would know who they were. They were like giving orders. So we knew right away that they were lying to us. And also, worse than that, they were making money off of this. Because later on, when the cases would go in court, they would be the ones to pay off the judges, pay off the prosecutor, pay off the police to make sure the charges would be dismissed. And this is something that happened a lot in the Philippines, but also in Indonesia and also in Malaysia and in other places. The CCP on one side says, no, we follow the law. We are good people. But in reality, what they do is they violate the law. They don't like the law. They only feel that they are the law, and that is wrong.
The CCP always lie. How did these actions by the CCP affect coral reefs and destroy the food sources of millions of people in Southeast Asia?
China is one of the countries that is a signatory. They approved this law, and they say, we will follow the law of the sea. But in reality, they violate and are one of the biggest violators of the law of the sea, because they use fishing nets that are the wrong kind of fishing nets, that take everything out from the ocean, including the small fish, including the sea urchins, including all the things in the ocean, and they just drag it along the bottom of the ocean, and it destroys the reef. That is just one method. The other one they use is explosives. They put explosives in the water so that the explosive blows up and it kills the fish. And then the fish floats on the surface. They come along and they take the fish. That is another method. It also destroys the reef. And earlier I mentioned to you how they use poisonous chemicals like cyanide and other things. The reason they use this is, you've been to maybe a Chinese restaurant maybe in China, maybe in Hong Kong, maybe in Macau. And you see the aquarium with all the fish inside, and the fish are all alive. But actually, those fish are dying because many of them are poisoned with sodium cyanide. That's how they catch them. That's how they put them in the tanks. And that's how they keep them alive. Because when you spray it with cyanide, when the fish gets hit by this, it knocks it out. And the fish still alive floats to the surface. And then they capture that. But that chemical goes down. It kills the seaweed. It kills the sea urchin. It kills everything in the ocean, the plankton that is the basis of life for the fish. And that is just some of the methods that the CCP does. You don't have to take my word for it. There are multiple reports about these activities based on groups like Greenpeace. They have multiple reports about this also on the UN that discusses and talks about how bad the situation is with the large fishing fleets that come out of Hainan and also places in Fujian. And what is the reason that we say, oh, it's the CCP's fault? Because if you look at the registry of who owns the fishing companies, they're all members of the CCP. Not just small members, but high-ranking members. And many of them are also generals inside the PLA. Because what a lot of people do not realize with China, here we live in America. We have the United States Army, the United States Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, Air Force. They are government departments. Anyone who is in those departments cannot take part in partisan politics. You do not see soldiers campaigning in the street for Donald Trump or Biden. It's against the law. But in China, the PLA, the army, supposedly of the people, is actually the army of the CCP. So even the military in China is controlled by the CCP. And what they do is they use the military not just for defense, but also to make money, to make business. And they do it in ways that include the fishing. And that is why they are driving Filipinos, Indonesians, Malaysians, people from Cambodia, people from Thailand away from their oceans. They're not content to just do it to Southeast Asia. Now they are doing it to Bangladesh and India as well. So it is really sad because it does not have to be that way. China is supposed to be a modern superpower, Asia's most powerful, richest nation. But yet they seem to act so badly, not because of the Chinese people, but because of the mismanagement and corruption of the CCP.
So how has the CCP's actions you mentioned now before impacted Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and others in the region?
About 60% of the sea produce comes from the seas around what China now calls Nansha. Nansha is a territory that they claim, along with Taiwan. But with Taiwan and these other countries, they negotiate. They discuss. They say, okay, this many fishing boats go here, this many fishing boats go there. Everybody can still fish, and they can still survive. But with the People's Republic of China, as you saw recently in television, they attack people with axes. They use knives, the machete, the bolo, as we call it in the Philippines. And these poor fools, these fishermen who are being used, don't even know that they're attacking Marines. They're attacking trained sailors who train with American SEALs. It's only because they are professional soldiers that all of those fishermen are still alive. Right now, the Philippines has already warned the CCP and China, especially its military, to stop doing these actions. Because if they continue to do these actions, they will fight back. And when they fight back, they have, as history shows us, always won. Remember, in 1521, there was a man by the name of Ferdinand Magellan. He came to the Philippines and thought for Spain he can conquer it all. He literally lost his head. He never completed his voyage. He is buried in the Philippines. And that is what happens to foreigners who come and abuse Filipinos, Malaysians, Indonesians. The locals will fight back. And what happens when the Filipinos fight back? So now the Chinese Navy comes in. When the Chinese Navy comes in, what happens? Now the US Navy has to react to the Chinese Navy, because Philippines is not just any country. It is a country that originally was part of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The Philippines was a commonwealth of the United States, just like Puerto Rico. And when there is an attack on the Philippines, it is an attack on the United States. So it could lead to war. So the CCP, because of its greed, because it wants to make so much money from the fishing, because it wants to control the resources of the sea, get the oil and everything, and prevent these other countries from using the fish, and make them buy everything from the CCP company. Now they're going to cause war. And to some of them, they say, oh, we can win. But these are men who've never fought any war other than video games. I have seen war. I have been in combat as a journalist. It is not pretty. I have seen even the most powerful nation on earth, the United States, and how its men and women suffer in time of war.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that I would ever want to see happen to China or any other country in Asia. Because that war will not just happen there. It can also happen here. So we have to be very careful to prevent that from happening.
You know, China detains many journalists and nags press freedom. Have you reported from China before? Did you face any dangers? Or do you or your colleagues have stories of danger and persecution while working in China?
I have had colleagues who have been arrested and detained by the CCP. As I mentioned, in 1989, when the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, some of my colleagues were photographers who were in Beijing when it happened. And they were arrested, detained, and kept by the CCP inside prisons. But prisons set aside for foreigners. At the time, the CCP was still very careful about arresting and harming foreigners who were journalists. That is not the case anymore. There are many journalists who are Westerners, Americans, British, and others, including Filipinos and other Asians, Indonesians, who are currently in prison in China just for doing their work as journalists. There are also businessmen, just because they send a report back to their company here in America, who are not allowed to leave China. They did nothing wrong. All they do is they just report what is happening in their company. And that report is not something the CCP wants people to know, of how bad things really are in some places and in some industries in CCP-controlled China. I want to be very clear that the problem is not with the Chinese people. It is with the CCP and the way they run business and government in China and how they oppress journalists. Now, I have been shot at with bullets by Chinese troops when I went to see the islands that they are building in the South China Sea. I have seen the beautiful lines of bullets coming up to the airplane I was riding. They did not shoot directly at us. If they wanted to shoot us down, they could. But they would send warning shots. They would put very bright lights that can blind the pilot. They would do things that could cause our plane to crash. And they did this multiple times to us when we would fly over the South China Sea. The CCP does not own the South China Sea. No country owns it. It is supposed to be for all of Asia to share, except for those areas where there are already people living in islands. And it is very sad that what the CCP is doing is creating problems where there need not be problems. If the CCP can just be truthful, can just allow people to express themselves there is no problem. What is the main issue with the way the CCP is running China? It is the oppression of people. It is the betrayal that they do to their own people. It is for somebody believing in something, they will take your kidney, your heart, your lung, whatever.
Have you personally witnessed the instance where the CCP said one thing but did another in their dealings with other countries?
Well, in the Philippines, they did it with the islands. As I said, I gave you a picture of the first 3 structures they built. And then they said, oh, we'll build other one, just for protecting the structure. And we built this for everybody, all fishermen to use. And that was not true. They used it for building islands and making a military base. What did the CCP do here in America? They said, oh, we're just building big factory in Mexico to build electric cars. Oh, the cars look exactly like Tesla. Oh, we're sorry. Maybe it's a copy, very good design. What did they do with the cell phone? You can look at many things in China and it looks exactly like iPhone, the iPad, the clothing, and they do it. And they say, oops, it's beyond our control. It's unscrupulous business people. We will punish them. Ha ha ha. They do not. They actually encourage people to lie, to steal, to do what is wrong, to take other people's ideas and then profit for themselves. That is wrong. Not just because, oh, I'm an American and they're copying an American company. No. Look at what they're doing with the South China Sea. China copies things, the CCP especially, when it comes to the government. In World War II, the Japanese created something they called the Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, where the Japanese went to many Asian countries and invaded and took them over and said, we're doing this to make Asia for Asiatics, to throw out all the colonials, to create a world where all together under Nippongo, under the Japanese. They were defeated. They lost. It was just a tool for Japan to take over countries and do bad things. What is the CCP doing? If you look at the 9-dash line, the 10-dash line, all the plans the CCP is doing in Asia and in the Pacific, it's the same thing the Japanese did in World War II. They're just doing it not with planes and bombs, but with the money that they make from the illegal things they do. So that is how the CCP lies. They say, oh, Japan was evil in World War II. They did bad things during the Sino-Japanese War. But yet, China is doing the same thing, copying almost exactly what they say was so bad.
Yeah, everyone like peace, but why did the CCP do this? Do you think the CCP is trying to take over not just China, but the whole of the Asia Pacific to denominate the world?
Well, if you look back in history, the slogan of the CCP is every country or every place under heaven will fly the flag of communism, of the CCP. It is an old slogan from the Red Book of Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution. They say, oh, everywhere will fly, everywhere under the sky will fly the flag of China. So their goal is it's old. Many, many years ago, 1960s, they want to take over the world. And they want to be the ones who represent communism, not just for Asia, but everywhere. And it is an old saying that many countries try. Look at Nazi Germany. Hitler tried to take over the world. He failed. Genghis Khan, he went from Mongolia and took over most of the world. But eventually also he died and it fell apart. Many cultures have groups like the CCP who think they are all powerful because they believe their own propaganda. Your program, this program, NTD, Epoch Times, we cannot see this in Beijing or in any major city in China, except secretly. But listen to why they are acting this way. Because they only see what is good. They only see people who tell them, oh, you are the greatest. You can do everything. They do not know that 2 of their admirals were recently arrested and taken out because of corruption in China. So there are many things that are happening that the CCP are doing in order to cover up all the other problems. The economy in China is not doing well right now. So what do? They want to create other problems in other places. So they create problem in Philippines. They say, oh, if we take back Taiwan, it will always be a unified China and there will be no more problem. But even if they took back Hong Kong, nothing changed. It's still the same bad government in China. So they want to use as excuse. And this is why they want to take the ocean and everything. But let's go back to why they do it. They do it to make money. They do it because if you control the fish in the sea, everyone has to buy from you. And that way, they will only be the ones to make profit. So that is what the real goal is here. They claim to be communist and for the common good, but they are not. They are for the common misery of everybody, to make everybody poverty, so that everybody has to go to China to buy their fish, to buy their food in Asia. And that goal eventually is maybe the whole world. Let's hope it does not happen. And I don't think it will. You know, there's too many people praying. There are too many people who have good belief. And in the end, as whether it is the teachings of different religions, what is one constant thing is that good always wins. Eventually, the CCP will be defeated.
So do you believe it's important for Americans and international people to support the CCP, and why?
I think it's important because the CCP is becoming as bad as the Nazi Party was in Germany in World War II. They are pushing towards war. They are causing violence in places where they do not belong. They are trying to steal territory of other countries, whether it is the border with India and the Himalayas, or islands and reefs off the Philippines, or places like Tibet that no longer exist, or the lands of the Taliban. Can you imagine? China is attacking the Taliban in Afghanistan. That one country that is supposedly the place where all the empires go to die. America lost there, Russia lost there, British lost there. Now China is fighting inside Afghanistan also to be able to control the minerals of that country. So this is why they have to end. Because if they do not, they could cause very, very bad problems in the world. China built one of the biggest navies in the world now. In fact, they have more ships than the US Navy. But because of the corruption, sometimes the ships have to be rescued by other countries because of the corruption in the Chinese CCP-run building programs for their military. The ships are breaking in half. And this is why Chinese admirals and generals are being arrested, charged by Xi Jinping and the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party because of all the issues that are occurring there. So the CCP has to end for even that very reason. Let's face it, where does the CCP's money come from? It comes from the sweat and toil and hardship and organs and everything of the Chinese people. And these people are being abused by a corrupt and almost evil government that does not truly reflect what the people of China want. The average person in China wants to have a family, maybe a home, place where they can work, that they are relatively assured of a good pay, benefits like medical, those types of things. Maybe they want socialist government, maybe they want democratic, it's up to them. But they are not even given the chance to decide. and this is something that has been going on since 1949. It is already too long. It is time for China to decide to give its own people freedom. They gave them the ability to go into business. But even in the business, they are not truly free. Because inside every business in China, to some extent, there is Xi Jinping looking over your shoulder. There is somehow the CCP in big business. When you are successful in China, the Communist Party comes into your business. You look at people like Wilson Ma, the people who founded Alibaba. He had problems. When his company became very successful, all of a sudden, he disappeared because he refused to follow certain things. The CCP wanted the data, wanted the information, wanted everything from his company. But at the end of the day, now he is not as famous or as rich as he was before. So this is the problem with the CCP. The term the Americans have for this, and the Westerners use, is totalitarian government. It is total. They want complete control of everything. And they will not allow anyone who becomes successful to become too successful unless they are there.
So do you have any words for some Chinese individuals who are still hesitant about quitting the CCP?
I remember when I was in school, there was training that we used to get where people would tell us that if someone was in an abusive relationship or being a victim of abuse, it was sometimes very hard to get those people to admit the abuse that was happening to them. Therefore, what we need to do is make these people see in China that the abuse does not need to happen, that they can be free from this abusive relationship that takes and gives very little back to them. They do not need to be slaves to the CCP. They do not need to be slaves to an evil regime. They do not need to be slaves to a group that believes in nothing but themselves. Can you imagine? They fear so many things around the world that they block people's ability to worship as they want. Why would you support that? Why would anyone support that? People have the right to believe what they want. People have the right to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of the practice of that religion. That is part of what we in America and what we in around the world are guaranteed. Not just in our American Constitution, but even in the UN Charter. Go to the UN building. Look at the 4 freedoms. Freedom to speak, to worship, to live. They're guaranteed. If your country is a country that indeed follows the United Nations Charter and wants to be a leading member of the global community, then it too should follow the rules and laws of the world. Not just the law of the sea, but the very UN Charter that gives you the right and the privilege to exist as a country and trade and have relations with other countries. Therefore, as Chinese people, it's not for me to dictate or say, but it's for me to say there is a better way. And that better way is a way you will have to find on your own. But I do not think it can be the way it is now. Because as we see more and more every day, there is just more danger of problems and risks and violence with China being the way it is. It needs to be ended. Not China, but the CCP. And this Communist Party is only bringing one thing that is common. As I said earlier, it is common misery, common poverty, and a commonness of evil that needs to be ended.
The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is on a mission. They want to control the world, much like they have controlled the Chinese people for the past 70 years. The recent events in Hong Kong are just a prelude to the CCP's far-reaching agenda. The regime is the root cause of the global pandemic virus now threatening us all. Get involved by joining the movement to end the CCP. Health experts in the United States believe the resurgence of the COVID-19 virus in Beijing and the U.S. states of Florida, Arizona, Texas, and the Carolinas may be 10 times higher than is being reported. And there is growing opinion around the world that this virus, the thousands of deaths it has caused, and the loss of millions of jobs is the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Reports also suggest that the CCP lied about the origin of the virus and covered it up, depriving countries time to prepare and thus allowing the virus to become a global pandemic killer. This is confirmed by Dr. Li Meng Yang, the Chinese virologist who recently fled from Hong Kong and whose research focused on coronavirus 19.
There are many patients that don't get treatment on time and diagnosis on time. There is no protection for both doctors and the patient and common people. And also, the government doesn't allow people to release such information. Hospital doctors are scared, but they cannot talk. CDC staffs are scared. I feel very disappointed. But I already know this would happen because I know the corruption among this kind of international organization like WHO to China government, to China Communist Party government. I deliver the message of the truth of COVID-19. If I tell it in Hong Kong, the moment I start to tell it, I will be despaired and killed. No one can hear me.
But according to Fox News, the CCP's negative impacts on the world extend far beyond just the virus. News reports reveal how CCP operatives are infiltrating America's infrastructure to steal its technology and weaken U.S. values. In a recent speech, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned U.S. governors to guard against the spread of the CCP's lies and harmful ideology into local governments, universities, military bases, and even the United Nations.
China has targeted K-12 schools through its Confucius classrooms, the CCP's program, to influence kids in elementary, middle, and high schools around the world. As of 2017, there were 519 of these classrooms in the United States. Beijing knows that today's kids are tomorrow's leaders. The China competition is happening. It's happening in your states, and it's a competition that goes to the very basic freedoms that every one of us values.
And apparently the warnings are starting to work. According to Inside Higher Ed News, at least 10 U.S. universities have announced plans to shut down their Chinese-funded Centers for Language and Cultural Education. Additional campuses are expected to do the same. Pushback against the CCP is not just happening in the United States. Ongoing reports by the Epoch Times have enabled the world to watch as Great Britain and other countries strongly object to China's attempts to usurp the promised freedoms of Hong Kong residents. A promise that would have allowed Hong Kong to continue governing itself independently from China through 2047.
其實而家直接指揮緊香港警察嘅應該唔係林鄭月娥，咁我相信就係呢個所謂政法委啦、國安公安嘅系統指揮緊香港警察，所以先至會咧係用一種更暴力、更兇狠嘅方式去鎮壓呢個香港嘅示威。
We've carefully assessed the legislation, and in particular, we've considered its impact on the rights, freedoms, and critically, the high degree of autonomy bestowed on Hong Kong under China's basic law for Hong Kong, as well as under the Joint Declaration, which, as the House will know, is the treaty agreed between China and the UK in 1984.
Instead, the CCP just passed a law that prevents the peaceful and courageous Hong Kong residents from engaging in, quote, treason, secession, sedition, and subversion. That law made Hong Kong another province of the dangerous CCP regime, a regime whose leadership has long been suspected of initiating cyber attacks and the theft of intellectual properties from successful countries around the world. A regime that wants you to believe is benevolent via their assistance in building roads and other infrastructure, but whose leaders are really attempting to enslave developing countries by swallowing up their resources and keeping them in debt to the CCP. The ultimate objective of China's Huawei and 5G is not to benefit the world, but to facilitate the CCP's spying. June, the Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP, or the Tui Dang Center, is asking the public to get involved by signing a petition to end the Chinese Party's infiltration of their lives and freedom.
中共邪党的邪恶本质，它不仅仅是祸害中国人，同时也祸害全世界的人。
Condemn the CCP for its crimes against humanity. Demand that your government begin investigations into CCP subversion within your country, and hold the CCP responsible for the damage it has caused both financially and to people's lives lost around the world. For more information, visit endccp.com.